You're looking at Unrendered on IKTV. I'm Tony Regisford, and I have the pleasure of having as my guest Sir George Alleyne. He's the Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, and better known as Champ Alleyne, for good reason. Professor Alleyne, welcome to Unrendered.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, you've been described by a Harvard University professor, Professor Frank, as one of the foremost global thinkers in health. Quite a description. This is something that puts you up to the cream of the crop, really. And you're the Chancellor of the University of the West Indies.
That's correct.
So you're quite a heavy puncher. Tell me something about your background, your road to all these dizzy heights.
I should mention, of course, that Holy Frank is a good friend of mine, so you should take with a grain of salt anything he says about you.
Well, I'm sure he's a credible source anyway.
But I am from Barbados.
Yes.
I came from a little village in Barbados called Merricks in St. Philip, Barbados. In the days when Barbados was divided perhaps into rural and urban, it no longer is so, with the other implications. I went to school in Barbados, went to school at the University of the West Indies when I was still young.
Yes.
I was one of the adventurous types who thought it was a good idea to go to a new university because I wanted to go to our university.
Right.
I was very pleased. One of the best 6 years in my life I spent at the University of the West Indies, graduated from the university, then went on to came back to Barbados to work. Came back to Barbados to work at the old Barbados General Hospital.
Yes.
Left, went off to Britain to do postgraduate work, came back to the University of the West Indies, stayed and worked for several years in a tropical metabolism research unit, and then was professor of medicine, Chamber Department of Medicine. Then I left the Department of Medicine, University of the West Indies, went on to the Pan American Health Organization, and the fullness of time became director. When I retired as director of the Pan American Health Organization, I became chancellor of the university. That's it in a nutshell.
You make that sound so simple because each milestone is a tremendous feat. And I'm going back to when you were the island scholar.
Yes.
You didn't mention that, but you were the island scholar in Barbados at the time when only one scholarship.
No. In my year there were four. Let's be.
Oh, there were four.
There were four.
Oh, okay.
Tom Adams was a contemporary of mine.
Okay.
Tom Adams won the scholarship the same year I did.
How difficult was it then to really, at the secondary school level, to achieve that sort of thing? Because you
now you look back. You say that life was kind to you. Look back. You look back. You're fortunate. You're fortunate to your parents. You're fortunate to your parents. My father was a school teacher. Mother was an inveterate reader.
Right.
My mother read. The whole family. We grew up with books, and I think perhaps that's one of the things that stood me in very good stead. This love for reading. My father used to say, if he had two things to leave you, he'd leave you a sense of humor and a love for books. So we grew up surrounded with books. So I got in those days, the primary to first grade, there was given one scholarship in the island to go to Harrison College.
Right.
I got the scholarship. You were lucky. You had some. I have to admit, you had some talent. You were lucky, and then you went to Harrison College. You were lucky to have very good teachers. I had some fantastic teachers in Harrison College, and you were encouraged to learn. And being encouraged to learn, having a good home atmosphere, I did reasonably well at school, and then got a Barbados scholarship.
Is the success to learning identifying what you really like from a very early stage? I read somewhere that you said, you didn't choose the arts because you couldn't draw a circle to save your own life, right?
Yes,
So you did the classics.
Yeah.
How much of people becoming successful, how much of that has to do with them identifying from a very early stage? This is what I'm good at.
Let's put it this way. I mean, the actual drawing, I am not good at that.
Yes.
I am not good at that for all kinds of other reasons. One is because I don't have very good depth of field vision. I got struck in one eye when I was a little boy, and I don't have very good depth of field vision.
Okay.
So I like to say, it probably is not true, but I was no good at drawing and painting. So I went and did Latin instead of going to do art. But at a certain basic level, when I came to do the classics, I could have done mathematics as well as could have done classics, because I think at that level in high school, if you're reasonably good, you could probably do much anything. I happen to like the classics, but I suppose I could have done as well as mathematics or modern studies. And when I left and went to do medicine, people said to me, was it a handicap to have done the classics? I said, I really didn't think so. Because I used to say, and I still maintain, that the same precision of thought that you put into doing a good Latin prose or good Greek prose is the same precision of thought you would put into solving a physics problem. I used to like to think so. And I still think so. The same precision of thought that is inculcated into youngsters in one branch of learning is equally applicable to other branches of learning.
You became a medical doctor through University of West Indies,
yes.
Mona, to be
Yes.
more specific. And you mentioned in your, when you were giving me a background of yourself, that this was a young university.
Yeah, young. When I went to the university, there were 200, the population was 202 students, 200 students when I went to university.
So you were one of the
early ones.
I
went in 1951. University started in 48, and I was there in 1951. And I thought it was a large complex, 200 students. Now there are 44,000 students in all the university as a whole. So it has grown.
You went on to the UK to do your postgrad. Talking about the university then and its accreditation, because it was a young university, how easy was it to then get accepted into postgrad school? Well, being a University of West Indies
it didn't make much of a difference. I tell you why. Our university, we had the tutelage of the University of London for 14 years. So the first 14 years, we got our degrees from the University of London. But when I graduated and I went to London to do postgraduate work, I was very fortunate that I worked with a professor of medicine at University College Hospital. And I was accepted in his unit, just like any one of the Englishmen or English women who work in his unit. He had come to Jamaica, actually, Professor Rosenheim, great guy, great man. I also quote one of his adages. He used to say to me, you never worry about what you're going to do next. If you're any good and you work hard at what you're doing, it'll be a sudden epiphany. You will see obviously what is the next step to take. I still tell young people that. You work hard at what you're doing. Don't think I'm going to plan 40 years ahead or 30 years of what I'm going to be. You work hard at what you're going to do what you're doing. And it become obvious to you the various channels that will open to you. But I worked with him, Max Rosenheim, and then in those days you had to get the membership of the Royal College of Physicians. I was fortunate to get the membership of the Royal College of Physicians, and then I came back to Jamaica to work in the university at that time.
What area of medicine were your early days spent in?
Internal medicine. I was an internist, and I like to think that my major area of concern was the kidney disease. And much of my research was done earlier on in the problems of malnourished children. I went to work in the research unit with John Waterlow. At that time, there was a lot of malnutrition around, and there was a lot of concern as to what are some of the disturbances of physiology and biochemistry that occurred in malnutrition. And John Waters' unit dedicated itself to elucidating some of the problems of malnourished children. For example, why did some grow rapidly and some didn't grow rapidly? Why were some swollen and not swollen? And much of my work was done on the renal function and the cardiac function of malnourished children. But I also then went on to Boston and spent some time in Boston working on renal metabolism in a great unit there in Boston with a professor called Arnold Relman. I became very interested in renal biochemistry. It seems to be very abstruse intricacies of renal biochemistry. And I came back to Jamaica, and we had a very good group in renal biochemistry. If I may be bold to say, our group in renal biochemistry then was as good as any in the world, really. I used to say, when I used to get up in conferences and say where you came from, I used to say, and my work is done in Jamaica, 90 miles south of Cuba, and not Jamaica, Long Island.
I was reading, in preparation for this program, a journal or a blog from John Hopkins, and they were saying that you became convinced about going into public health. You were on some flight coming from China, I think it was. I'm not sure.
I'll tell you the story.
And you sat next to one of the Hopkins
Carl Taylor
professors,
Yeah,
and he was trying to convince you
Yeah.
to move from medicine to public health. Tell me the story, but I also want to ask you, I'm a lay person. What is the difference, medicine, public health?
Yeah.
So, but tell me the story
At
first.
that time, I was in the Department of Medicine. I
Yes.
was a reasonably good internal medicine. I was a really good physician. I was fascinated by internal medicine. I was fascinated by my students in internal medicine, and I liked dealing with my individual patients. And I went to a conference in Chiang Mai in Thailand. Yes, and I went there to talk about my research. And on the way back, I sat beside Carl Taylor. Carl Taylor was a very, very interesting gentleman. He was one of the persons who first developed the idea of primary health care. And he was a great proponent of the power of the people in medicine, the power of the people in health. And he is a great, one of the founders of the Department of International Health in Hopkins. And he tried to persuade me, why don't you do something useful? Why don't, instead of treating individual patients, why don't you go into public health where you deal with populations as a whole? I thought he was crazy, of course. So I said to him, no, Carl. But I remember the time because eventually I did come to Hopkins. I now have an adjunct professorship at Hopkins.
Right.
And when I left internal medicine, as chairman of the Department of Medicine, my students, my research, etc., I left to go to PAHO. Initially, I was going to go to PAHO for 1 year, and I stayed forever and ever. But I didn't have any. The debate was whether I would come back. It was a sabbatical, so I wouldn't come back to the Department of Medicine, but I stayed. And the truth is that after time, if you deal with one patient at a time, with one problem at a time, it becomes clear that maybe you could deal with lots of people. You could exert your talents dealing with lots of people rather than one individual. And the fundamental difference in public health is that.
Well, Sir George, when we come back to pick up the second segment, I want to look at your work in public health because I think it is fair to say that though you made a name in medicine, you made a significant name for yourself in public health. So I want to...
I would say it's been a progression.
Yes.
It's same like Max Rosenheim tells you, right? You do what you're doing well, and then it becomes
everything
clear.
else happens. Let's pick it up in the second section. Sure. You're looking at Unrendered, and my guest is the Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Sir George Alleyne. More with Sir George when we come back.